The ramp changed everything for Claire. Most people would look at it and see wood, bolts, and railings. But to her, it meant freedom. The first time she rolled down that ramp by herself, she stopped halfway and just sat there quietly for a moment. Not because something was wrong, because something finally felt right again. After the accident, there were a lot of moments like that. Moments people outside the situation would never notice. The pause before getting into a doorway. The hesitation before stairs. The frustration of needing help for things that used to be automatic. People think recovery is only physical. It isn't. A huge part of it is emotional. Losing mobility changes how someone feels inside their own home. And for months, Claire hated asking for help. Even from me. Especially from me. That's why the ramp mattered so much. It gave her something back. Independence. Privacy. Dignity. The house itself was perfect for us otherwise. Quiet neighborhood. Tree-lined streets. Large front yards. One of those upscale suburban communities where every lawn looked professionally trimmed. The kind of place where people smile politely while secretly monitoring each other through windows. Still, when we moved there, I honestly believed things would be fine. I thought reasonable people would understand why someone in a wheelchair might need accessibility accommodations. That assumption turned out to be very wrong. The ramp itself was professionally designed. Safe incline. Proper support rails. ADA compliant from every angle. And I made sure it actually looked good too. Clean design. Neutral colors. Nothing excessive. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a federal ADA attorney. Accessibility law was literally my profession. So before construction even started, I made sure every single requirement was perfectly followed. That's why what happened next was so unbelievable. 3 days after installation, the HOA noticed it. Noticed isn't even the right word. Targeted would be more accurate. The first violation notice arrived taped to our mailbox. An authorized exterior modification. I stared at the paper for a long time. Not because it scared me. Because it annoyed me. There's something uniquely insulting about seeing accessibility described as a violation. Claire tried brushing it off. Said maybe it was automatic. Maybe they just needed documentation. But I already knew better. Because I've spent years watching organizations hide discrimination behind professional language. And the wording in that notice told me exactly what kind of people we were dealing with. A second notice arrived 2 days later. This one complained that the ramp was visually disruptive to neighborhood aesthetics. That sentence actually made Claire quiet. Not angry. Quiet. Which was worse. Because suddenly she started seeing herself as a burden again. That destroyed me. People don't understand what disabled individuals go through emotionally after losing independence. Every look matters. Every comment matters. Every reminder that they're different cuts deeper than outsiders realize. And now a group of strangers was essentially telling my sister that her accessibility made the neighborhood uglier. I watched her sit near the living room window one evening staring toward the front porch. Then softly she asked, "Do you think we should just remove it?" That question changed everything for me. Because the second she asked that, I realized this situation was no longer annoying. It was discriminatory. Clear. Direct. Illegal discrimination. And the HOA board had no idea who they were dealing with. Most people panic when official-looking legal notices appear. I don't. Paperwork is my environment. So I sat down that night and started reading every HOA bylaw carefully. Every regulation. Every enforcement clause. Every procedural rule. And within 20 minutes, I realized they had made a catastrophic mistake. Not a small mistake. A federal-level mistake. Because under federal disability law, reasonable accommodations are protected. Strongly protected. Especially in housing situations. The more I reviewed their notices, the worse it became. The wording alone was dangerous. They repeatedly framed disability access as a nuisance to property values. Legally, that's devastating language. And somehow, they put it in writing. Signed writing. I almost couldn't believe it. Then came the final letter. A $12,000 fine. $12,000. For a wheelchair ramp. Claire looked physically sick reading it. And honestly, that's the moment I stopped seeing the HOA as incompetent. Now they were dangerous. Because intimidation like that works on people. Most families would remove the ramp immediately out of fear. Most people don't know their rights. Most people can't afford federal legal battles. But unfortunately for them, federal legal battles are literally what I do for a living. The HOA scheduled a board meeting the following Thursday. And I decided to attend personally. The clubhouse looked exactly how you'd expect. Luxury furniture. Perfect landscaping outside. Expensive decorations everywhere. Organizations obsessed with appearances always decorate heavily. Usually because they're compensating for deeper problems underneath. The board members sat behind a long polished table when I entered. Most looked confident. Almost smug. Especially the HOA president. Karen. She had that exact personality type I'd dealt with many times before. The kind of person who mistakes authority for superiority. The kind who believes rules exist primarily to control others. She spoke for almost 10 straight minutes. Property standards. Neighborhood consistency. Visual harmony. Community image. Every sentence carefully crafted to sound reasonable while disguising discrimination underneath. And I let her talk. Because people who think they're powerful usually expose themselves eventually. Then she said something that changed the entire room. We cannot allow individual accommodations to negatively impact the visual integrity of the neighborhood. Individual accommodations. That phrase alone was dangerous enough to destroy them federally. But she didn't realize it. So I calmly reached into my briefcase, pulled out my business card, and slid it across the table. The second she read it, everything changed. Her face lost confidence instantly. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough to reveal panic underneath. Because suddenly, the difficult homeowner sitting across from them was a federal ADA attorney specializing in disability discrimination lawsuits. And every notice they'd sent, every fine, every statement, had already become evidence. The room went completely silent. One board member actually removed his glasses and reread my card twice. Another stopped making eye contact entirely. That's usually how you know people understand the severity of their situation. I opened my folder calmly and began explaining federal accommodation law. Slowly. Very slowly. Not because I enjoyed intimidating them. Because clarity matters in legal situations. I explained reasonable modification protections. Fair Housing Act obligations. ADA accommodation requirements. Retaliation liability. Punitive damages. Attorney fees. Federal enforcement exposure. And with every page I turned, their confidence collapsed further. Meanwhile, Karen kept trying to interrupt. Trying to reframe the situation as community standards. Then she made the mistake that completely destroyed them. She said, "The neighborhood appearance matters more than special exceptions." The second those words left her mouth, half the board froze. Because unlike Karen, they finally realized what was happening. I calmly wrote her statement into my notes. That terrified them more than any argument could have. Because in federal court, documented discriminatory statements become catastrophic. And now I had one. Directly. In front of witnesses. Signed notices were already bad enough. But verbal confirmation. That changes lawsuits completely. Suddenly the other board members started distancing themselves from her immediately. You could literally watch survival instincts activate around the table. One member quietly asked if the board could reconsider the fine. Another suggested forming a review committee. Classic panic behavior. Because organizations always try softening situations once they realize real liability exists. But by then, it was too late. Word spread through the neighborhood quickly afterward. And residents became furious. Not at us. At the HOA. Because most homeowners had no idea the board was targeting a wheelchair ramp. The public optics alone were horrible. Disabled woman threatened over accessibility modifications. Federal attorney involved. Potential discrimination lawsuit. The story practically destroyed the HOA's reputation overnight. But what made things worse for them was what I discovered next. Once I started reviewing HOA enforcement history, patterns appeared everywhere. Selective enforcement, improper fines, targeted intimidation. Rules applied differently depending on the resident. And legally, patterns matter a lot, because patterns establish intent. Now the HOA didn't just look discriminatory, it looked systemically discriminatory. That's devastating federally. Within a week, the HOA's own attorneys demanded emergency meetings. I know because one of them quietly contacted me personally afterward. And honestly, he sounded exhausted. Apparently Karen ignored multiple warnings already. That didn't surprise me. People addicted to control rarely believe consequences apply to them. Until suddenly they do. The emergency board meeting happened 10 days later. Completely different atmosphere this time. No confidence. No smug speeches. No superiority. Just fear. Real fear. Because now they understood the scale of exposure they faced. Federal investigations. Civil liability. Personal accountability. Insurance complications. Public records. And most importantly, public humiliation. Organizations fear embarrassment almost more than lawsuits. Especially wealthy HOAs obsessed with image. Karen looked completely different during that meeting. Smaller somehow. Less certain. Because authority built on intimidation collapses fast once challenged legally. The board offered to remove the fine immediately. Then they offered written apologies. Then policy revisions. Then accommodation guarantees. But by then, this wasn't just about our ramp anymore. It was about principle. Because if they treated us this way, how many other people had they pressured before? How many elderly residents? How many disabled families? How many homeowners simply gave up because they lacked legal knowledge? That thought bothered me more than the fine itself. Eventually the HOA settled completely. Full removal of penalties. Formal policy restructuring. Mandatory federal compliance training. Public accommodation protections added to bylaws. And Karen. She resigned 3 weeks later. Quietly. No announcement. No farewell. Just gone. Honestly, that was probably best for everyone. Claire kept the ramp. Of course she did. But more importantly, she stopped feeling ashamed of needing it. That mattered most to me. Because accessibility is not weakness. Accommodation is not special treatment. And disability rights are not optional suggestions. They're law. Strong law. Necessary law. The kind written because too many people spent too many years being treated unfairly. That's why cases like this matter. Not because of revenge. Not because of lawsuits. Because dignity matters. Independence matters. And nobody should ever feel guilty for needing accessibility in their own home. Especially not because of someone obsessed with appearances. Sometimes I still sit on the front porch in the evening watching Claire roll down that ramp toward the garden. And every time, I think about how close she came to believing she didn't deserve it. That's the real damage discrimination causes. Not financial. Emotional. It convinces people they're inconvenient. And that's exactly why people like Karen must be challenged. Every single time. If you enjoyed this cinematic story, hit like. Subscribe for more HOA justice stories. And tell me, where are you watching from?